Hello, 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 ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and everyone and everything in between. Welcome to the Stay Positive Podcast, University Edition. This is the first one I'm recording separate from Pete at university, so hopefully the audio quality isn't questionable. But I'm sure it'll be great.
Oh, how the turns have tabled. You now understand what it's like to be just in the most happy of all places,
School.
buzzing with energy, doing the things that everybody loves to do at the ripe age of 24 or 25 or younger. Yeah, you get it. This is the whole empathy thing. This is what they write about in those self-help books. You know what I'm saying?
This is what it means by like walk a mile in someone else's shoes, you know?
Exactly. So now that you're walking 1 foot in my shoes, you still have another 1599 feet to go.
Yeah, that's.
And then let me know how your feet feel after.
I'm already like I want to take a knee right now, you know.
Okay, all jokes aside. So interesting thing that we talked about a couple of days ago that I wanted to bring up, and I don't know. So I'm gonna first off say how ignorant I am with not only the legal system but also financial legislature in general. For me, one interesting thing that a lot of people have observed is the fact that there are people that can make laws about money and how we handle money, and even further along, they have access to certain financial vehicles that allow them to benefit, which to me seems very, very counterintuitive, because if you're the one making the laws, you shouldn't have skin in the game, because then that provides an incentive for you to make laws that are favorable to your situation. Maybe that's a completely weird observation. I don't know. Once again, I'm going to mention my ignorance here. So, high level, I don't really know how much sense it makes to have people that work on these financial committees and do things that allow them to possibly have outsized returns in their investment portfolio, for instance. This is just my rant of the day. I don't really know how that makes sense and how it benefits. If you're a person making the laws, how does it benefit everybody else, your constituents? Tell me, Alex, do you have something that can enlighten me? Because I don't know.
Pete, are you implying that people in power make decisions solely for their self-interest and nothing else?
No.
No, that's crazy talk.
There's no way that's possible.
It's crazy. Yeah, it's kind of weird how like these politicians, their salaries are only a few $100,000. I think the president of the United States, his official salary is $400,000 a year. Pretty good salary, nothing to scoff at. Yes. Somehow, a lot of these presidents, after their terms, are multimillionaires. Now, as a math major, maybe I slept in my economics classes because I didn't like economics. But I'm pretty sure to become like a multi-millionaire, you're going to need more than a salary of only $400,000 a year.
You might be wrong. I don't know.
I could be.
The math does check out, to be fair.
That is true, but the millions of dollars I'm talking about are like the double digits, not just a handful. But like you said, I should admit my ignorance too. I don't know what these politicians are thinking. I'm not a mind reader. I'm not a political science major. I don't know what they're thinking, but it is an interesting little pattern how their net worth somehow skyrockets after a few years making decisions about economic and financial policies. It's weird, right?
Just a tad.
Coincidental, I'm sure.
Yeah. Just a tad bit. The biggest case study that we all know and love is Nancy Pelosi. I mean, Speaker of the House, yet has the most incredible returns. I'm talking 20+% each year. Only in the regular markets, of course, because if we start betting on other types of markets, hint, hint, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, you'll see a little more than 20% a year.
Yeah.
But yeah, some outstanding numbers.
What can she say? She's just that good.
Yeah,
For those
totally.
of you who want, a little bit of context, Nancy Pelosi, she went to, I believe, Congress, and or was just being interviewed by reporters. And one of the reporters, they asked her, they said something along the lines of, "Don't you think that people in charge of legislature, they should not be allowed to have a hand in stocks and in shares and in the financial market?" And her immediate response was, "No, no, no. It's about freedom. We should be free to make these choices." And, on the surface, I agree with freedom, but also what I believe in following the law. And the law states something, I've always heard this term, inside trading,
Oh yeah.
or yeah, or market manipulation,
Oh yeah.
which are both illegal. You're not supposed to be able to do those things. So, but she can. She can manipulate and she can make changes. And as is her job, legislature, they need to be able to make changes where needed. But if you also have a hand in the market, doesn't that mean you can, make a change and know what's going to happen a full week in advance before it actually happens, and then make all the trades and all the buy the shares and options and all that good stuff, and then, cash out?
Yeah. Well, look, like I said at the beginning, this all boils down to purely a conflict of interest. If you, let's say you, Alex, you wanted to tell me how to do something, and you framed it in a way that you could benefit from that as well. And in the end, whether I benefited or not didn't matter to you. Of course, you want to make it look like that on the surface. But as long as you benefited from whatever it is that you're making me do, or giving me constraints to do that thing, you're just going to keep on doing it, right? You're not going to stop. If anything, you'll even abuse the fact that you can tell me whatever you want to tell me, and I stay within those boundaries, and you have the ability to keep on milking the cow, per se.
Yeah, I mean, technically, if the system works in your favor and you're not breaking any rules, why not? And in that regard, totally agree, totally fine. But if there's one thing we can learn from American history and human history in general, is that sometimes pre-existing and pre-established systems aren't always the best.
Right. No, we gotta improve upon them. So here's an interesting thing that I thought of. The people that are trying to push for, at least advocating for, holding stocks or bonds or whatever it is that they are creating legislature for, they have an outsized political risk on just the premise that they could possibly do something completely counterproductive. And as a result, a lot of people, their constituents, they end up deciding, oh, you suck. And now we're going to vote for the exact opposite party, which is literally the story of my life for American politics. Not my life, but story of American politics life is just one party messes up, quote unquote, and then the other party decides to capitalize on it. And even though they're all both just rebranded, rewashed versions of the same thing, they try to make things look partisan. They try to make things look super edgy and very polarized, but dude, they're all the same people.
I mean, I've thought for a long time, because I don't like bipartisanism at its most extreme, because that causes tension, it causes one-dimensional thinking, it causes mob mentality, and these are all things I personally would wish society would move away from, not move towards. But at the same time, I do think to a certain extent we do need two sides, because if you only had one side, then that would be horrible, because then no one would stand against you.
Mm-hmm.
When you have two sides, you have, a kind of a tug of war, so to speak. And in a perfect world, that society would kind of stay in the middle, since, both sides have good ideas and bad ideas. No side, I think, is perfect by any means, especially not the politicians. Even if we have our own personal biases as to who's good and who's bad, the truth is they're all special in their own way, to put it nicely.
Okay, but let me flip your logic on you. If the whole point is just to have differing opinions in whatever situation for whatever matter to benefit whoever, why don't we have more than 2? Why don't we have 10 different opinions? Of course, it becomes hard to manage at scale, right? But my point is, why are there only 2 factions, 2 groups, 2 ideologies? There should be more. And of course there are technically more political parties, right? I'm not trying to ask why there is a Republican and Democrat party. I don't care about that. I'm saying, why is it that we need to relegate ourselves to those 2 schools of thought when there are definitely more opinions?
Yeah, so my next point following the 2 parties is, why not have more? Because in markets, having more competition is usually way better for the consumers, because each of the groups of people are now trying to make the quality of the product as high as can, while also selling it at the lowest price. And this competition leads to both quantity and diversity amongst all the products. That's why monopolies are kind of bad, is because once a monopoly exists, they can do whatever they want. They can rip you off as badly as they want, and you have no say. But if there's 10 companies doing it, the second one person sells for a cheaper price or has a better product, you're immediately going to go there, and the other companies are going to have to follow your lead or risk going bankrupt. Now, why doesn't that work in politics? I think theoretically it would work, except for one little issue, and that is they're all fighting for power, which I wish I didn't have to phrase it that way, but unfortunately that's kind of the circumstance it is. They're not acting like civil servants anymore. They're acting like politicians, which, is unfortunate. But the thing is, let's say there were 3. There actually have been elections that had 3 people at the debates and 3 people. It only happened a very small handful of times in the recent years. But when that happened, some of the political parties would say, you stole my votes away from me, and that's why I lost. And that's why my other party, one of the 2 of the bipartisan parties, that's why they won, is because you stole my votes. And this leads to a conflict of interest, where it's you aren't popular. The third party in this example, you're not popular enough to dethrone the 2 parties, but you're enough of a hindrance to hurt one of us. So if you really want to win and contribute, you need to pick a side. And it's that pick a side mentality that I think is the problem. And you could honestly make the argument that that's almost human nature, since humanity as a whole, we've always acted as a collective. We always banded together. You don't see human beings living alone, or for the most part, when you look at history, you don't see tribes living one person as a individual. No, you see them living as a group, as a collective. And I think that's what helped us survive, and that's one of our primal instincts. But now in the modern era, the equivalent of this is politics, which is unfortunate, because now instead of banding together for survival, it's banding together for a name, a label, essentially. Because there are some things that some parties do, one party does, that's really bad. But if you are a part of that party, you're kind of stuck. You're kind of in a dilemma. Do you join the party that you don't really agree with at all, but at least they didn't stoop as low as this party, my party? Or do I just stick to my party because while I don't like what they're currently doing, overall, I agree with most of the things? And it becomes this pick a side, And when you're stuck with 2 choices to pick a side, the truth is, it is not technically impossible to overcome this, But the problem is this would require a mass number of people to join a third party or a fourth party, or, people need to say, I've had enough of these two parties, let's pick a third one. But it's hard because there's always the fear of, what if not enough people are on my team? Then essentially I wasted my time. I wasted my vote. And with that mentality, people get either afraid or they become, what's the word for passive, or content? Let's just say content. They become content with the current system because they're too afraid to waste their vote on a third party.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're stuck with two parties, and what's worse is, as time progresses, these two parties know that they're the only two parties, It's almost like a monopoly. Not necessarily a monopoly, because there are two parties, but it's like each party is kind of a monopoly for themselves. It's like, and they don't, no one worries about the Green Party or the what is it, the Libertarian Party. No one's there are people voting for them, but you don't see conservatives or liberals, Republicans or Democrats. You don't see them worried about that, them being taken over. Which, I kind of wish we had one instance of this, where there is a third party thrown into the mix who gets to go into the debate and actually, because that would force both sides to kind of be oh shoot, this guy or girl, he's here with us. All the people can see him or her. They might vote for them. And it's and that might put their priorities back in check. They'll be oh, well, now we can't just mooch off our name. Now we actually have to make promises and uphold those promises. Because if we don't, the third guy is going to get it. But, here's a little trivia fact. In the late 1900s, there was not a law per se, but a institute that was established by both the Republicans and the Democrats that basically said the only way you can join the debate and be a main name during the elections is if you acquire a very high percentage of votes in the polls. And naturally that's really hard to get. And that's why it's almost impossible for a third party to actually join the group. And it's crazy because it's funny, and it's also funny because you have the two sides who are supposed to be against each other banding together and saying, okay, let's get rid of all third parties and just make it between you and me. And that's unfortunate, but it really goes to show that our current system really tries to disincentivize a third party, which, only time will tell how long that will last. But I do hope that integrity doesn't completely get abolished in the realm of politics, if it hasn't already. But, like you said earlier, if someone oversteps their boundaries and stops and doesn't uphold any of their promises, eventually all your constituents, all your supporters are going to say, well, you've screwed me for the last 10 years. I'm going to give this other guy a shot. And that's when, and it's basically like a yo-yo effect where it's you go too far one way and then you the people go to the other way. And then eventually that side will go too far and then it goes back and then it goes forth and then it goes back and then it goes forth. And it technically averages in the middle, but not necessarily because there's a central party per se, but rather the parties just keep flip-flopping back and forth because they can't uphold their own integrity. They just keep flip-flopping because one goes too far, which allows the other to take over, and then they'd go too far, and it just goes back and forth, which from the outside looking in, if I wasn't American, I'm sure I'd be laughing, but I mean, even as an American, I'm laughing because we notice this is happening, but nothing's stopping it. But only time will tell.
Well, so I want to zoom out a little bit because I don't even want to talk about the two-party system or just politics in general.
Yeah.
Let's think about how schools of thought are formed in general, right? people just decide they have an opinion on something, or they have a frame of mind, a schema with which to interpret the world, and then they say, okay, I'm going to overlay this on how I see everything. I think you remember when we had a conversation with Zayam about how he tries to manage his inputs and just breaks them down in this crazy this guy is a wizard. I don't know. But the point is, when you start finding people that do that similar to you, then you start creating those overlaps, right? And the more overlaps you have on fundamental things, then the easier it is for you to band together. And then what happens when you find a third person? Okay, yeah, you've created a bigger group. What happens when you get to person 10? Still growing. 100. Growing more. 1,000. 10,000. 10 million. That's how you turn just a simple idea into a whole political faction. From my vantage point. Of course, there's a lot more that needs to be said about how ideas flow, because we are a society of flows. We are no longer just a society of individuals. We've been over this one. And ideas themselves, memetics, remember, you know how we have genetics and memetics, those things are very, very elusive from the general populace. You cannot see them. The only way we could actually visceralize memetics right now is by going on the internet and seeing memes in action, because otherwise, before the internet, it would be so hard. The only other way you have is through language itself, and that's literally impossible, because language is one of the most difficult things to get perfectly right, because there are, first of all, 160 180 languages on this planet, maybe more, and there are different tonalities, there are different expressions, emotions that people need to convey when they're speaking. Like right now, I'm very, very upbeat, right? I could have slept 2 hours instead and be really dead. And it doesn't matter what I'd be saying. If I was saying the same thing, you would be getting a different message from me. And that alone, with us speaking the same language, can have a completely different impact. So these things are so easily changeable. It's almost like a butterfly effect. You start off with just one little point, and if you veer off a tiny bit, you could end up going a totally different way and causing a hurricane in Texas just from a butterfly flapping its wings in Chile. I don't know. So the point is, when we create ideas, they have vast, vast implications on a lot of different things. And the problem I have with when these ideas start growing and growing and encompassing a lot of individuals is that you create these herd-like mentalities, like you said, and eventually there has to be some kind of representative for said ideas, right? Because it's impossible to assemble all the opinions and thoughts of every nuanced little take that everybody has on the general faction of ideology. You can't just decide, hey, we're going to get everybody's ideas on a piece of paper, read them out loud, do this perfectly like they did in ancient Greece 1,000 years ago, and then everybody can be happy and we can live in nirvana. It's not how it works. We need representatives, right? And so we decide to elect those people, and those people turn out to actually just be people and not representatives, so they do things for their own moral, selfish gain. Immoral, rather. So here's the other thing, too. I'm not a huge fan of AOC or Elizabeth Warren, but they are very big proponents of the not holding stocks in Congress, right? They love that idea, especially AOC. She loves hating on Bitcoin. She loves hating on any type of financial structure if you're a congressman or congresswoman. And to me, it makes sense, but I also just don't know. I don't understand the argument against well enough. Maybe you can give me that argument. I don't want to put you on the hot seat. I just don't really get why.
Why people in the government should be allowed to have stock and shares?
Right, because, look, I told you that it's basically having skin in the game incentivizes you to make it beneficial for yourself. On the opposite end, it is because you have skin in the game that you also are exposed to more risk, right? So that's the very high level two sides of that coin. I don't know what the argument is for the opposite side well enough.
The argument is that they should be seen as citizens of America, and as such, they should be treated like citizens of America, and regular citizens are allowed to own shares. And since they're supposed to be like that, supposed to be seen as just like you and I, they too should also be allowed this. Now, it's hard to argue against that because to a certain extent there is truth behind that sentiment. The difference is, as a regular person, I don't control legislature. I put you in charge of that as my government representatives in the federal and legislative branches, but as I feel like there should be, to a certain extent, as the representative, you should not be allowed to, like, it's weird to say, but I do think representatives should be not shunned by society, but they should kind of abstain from regular society until their term is done, because that way they can't abuse anything. Because if they make a rule that they can immediately take advantage of right away because they made the rule and they know what's going to happen, that's not fair compared to the regular citizen who didn't make the rule and didn't know this rule was going to be made. But if that wasn't the case, where they can make this rule but they themselves can't engage, this puts, I think, an equal balance where they need to act on the benefit of the people, because that's who they're supposed to be. These people are civil servants. As far as the United States of America's government, politicians are not supposed to be politicians. They're supposed to be civil servants. They're supposed to be our representatives. As in, what the people want, you give. Not you get power to do whatever you want and then take advantage of that power to get everything you want and then say, well, all the decisions I made were for you. I just happened to get the best part of this deal. But I did for you.
Long end of the stick.
The long end of the stick. I happen to get that. You know, but trust me, as your politician, I did it for you. Trust me. Would I lie? I'm being sarcastic if the subtlety is too high.
Okay, well, if you were in the position, for instance, how moral would you be? Would you, if you had the ability to create laws, at the very least, that you would benefit from directly, can you honestly tell me that you wouldn't do the same?
I mean,
even if it's your job to be super objective, because that is what these representatives are, right? They are objective. They are doing it for the people, by the people, yada, yada.
That's what it says on paper. Yes, that is true. Would I do it like you long ago you said absolute power corrupts absolutely,
yes,
or something along those lines. And I like to think to myself that yes, I would uphold my integrity and I would make decisions for the well-being of the people, but it's obviously easier said than done. But I do think that if you remove all the potential rewards of being a government official, this in turn kind of forces them to make decisions for the benefit of the people, because if they don't, one, they won't reap any benefits because they're not allowed to get any benefits, and two, if they make a bad decision that harms the people, then they will lose the election next time, or maybe get impeached, depending on how bad they screw it up. And I think that's like I don't know if you call it a moral. I think that should be how it works. They should really see themselves as like our representatives who represent our ideas, not just people with their own thought, which is hard because, like you said, when creating a school of thought, you slowly but surely garner a following until you have like millions of people following you, and then you elect a representative. Does that representative have a viewpoint that is shared by all 10 million people? Or is it just their specific viewpoint with all the nuances and all the specifics that are different from everyone else's, and then combine that with power, which can now alter their original perspective since now they have influence, and you get, I don't want to say a recipe for disaster, but you get something that is way more unpredictable, or way more, ironically, maybe more predictable, since, like you said, power really does change most people. So it's easy to see someone with a following of 10,000, 10 million, 100 million to just start talking and saying to themselves, well, I have 100 million followers, so that means for sure my ideas are good. And ironically, I think that's kind of social media as well. I know we're talking about politics this episode, or legislature, but I think to a certain extent, like, e-celebrities have this even worse, because unlike politicians who at least need to like sound smart, e-celebrities, most of them just need to be entertaining, which means they don't even need to have a good idea. But once they have a following, they can just start just losing their mind and proposing like crazy ideas that, if you take 2 seconds to analyze and dissect, you might realize they're not good. But then the followers, they'll be like, well, I follow this guy and 100 million others follow this guy, so obviously he must have a point. Which, sounds stupid, but I'm confident everyone listening here, no matter where you're from, North, South America, Asia, Europe, wherever you are, you know someone who is influenced by some popular influencer or popular TikToker or anything. I'm confident you know at least one person. And you know that it's kind of, I don't want to say sad, but it really is impactful how a big following can get to people's heads.
Yeah, I just don't enjoy the fact that people seem to mindlessly follow the herd in these situations. And I know we always come back to this, and I always like to think that people have the ability to just check out in that sense, just literally straight from the pack if you want, in a good way. However, it's not the easiest thing to do. Because here's the thing also. We really do love to feel like we fit in. And when we start getting the feeling that we're not fitting in, it makes us feel awkward and uncomfortable, right? So yeah. I don't know how many can resolve that emotion or those feelings in general of not fitting in. Because, dude, people have desires to feel important, and when we feel important as part of a collective whole in some capacity, it's addicting. It is. It's literally a rush of dopamine. We say, oh, wow, I did that. I was part of this group, and we as a group did this huge thing. This is a literal positive feedback cycle that's created, and as a result, behavior becomes modulated on massive scales. Because, truth be told, democracy is a really finicky thing, man. When we think about it, very, very high level. Like I said, it doesn't seem to work very flawlessly on the scale of 10 million people. But if we had 100 people, just a little city-state, the way they were in Greece, I don't see why that doesn't work. And monarchies, to an extent, also worked fine for the people that benefited from them, at least. But that was very small scale, even smaller scale than the types of societies that democracies were. Of course, monarchies were also very unsustainable, and they definitely exploited many others. Of course, we understand what serfdom was in medieval times. But in general, every little change or every new type of political structure that exists in our society, somehow, some way, I feel is always behind the times. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't seem like they've always got it completely figured out. And we're human beings, right? So we never have it completely figured out.
Yeah. We make it up as we go, just like most of these people who pass legislature.
Yeah, exactly.
But I all this talking, I have a question. So many times in previous episodes, we've talked about how honestly amazing moderation is, how like don't ever overdo or underdo something, always like try and balance your life. And you talking about how in smaller population sizes it's certain systems of government actually work decently well, whereas when you increase the size, it gets too big. Do you think, and this is maybe a weird phrasing, do you think like societies overall need to be like moderate sized? Like societies need to be in moderation. You can't just have one big society, rather having smaller societies like intertwined with each other, like that are next to each other and interact with each other, but they kind of make their own rules and their own like small locations. And I love the United States of America. I love the world, but like here's like a weird thought experiment. What if the United States of America? What if every state became a country, and they each had their own president, and we all kind of did our own thing? Would that be better than the current system?
I have no idea. I've never thought about that
know.
at all. I don't know why it would suck. I don't know why it would be amazing. I need time to think about something like that.
I think the original Americans, because the thing is, America, when it was founded in 1776, the population was really small compared to now, significantly smaller. And when they made all these rules, the Constitution, I think, is brilliant. I've read the Constitution; it's really good. But it is. It is. Now, whether they actually applied the stuff they wrote, that's a different question. But
the first ever draft of the Constitution, there were some parts in there, Alex, that we both
maybe
know
not the first. I read like the updated one.
Are just not applicable to today's society, man.
Maybe I read the updated version. But
well, dude, when we had literal laws written in to exploit minorities.
Of course, those are bad. But with stuff like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, I think that's poetry right there.
So you're talking about overarching philosophy of it?
Yeah, the general idea of the country of America, because it was one of, if not the first, decentralized governments ever.
Okay.
Or maybe not the first. I'm sure the Greeks or the Romans created some system similar, but it was the first that really garnered huge success, since almost the entire world adopted it after America became a thing in the next 100 years. But the thing is, they created that system with only maybe a handful of millions of people, and even then, I'm probably sure it was even smaller than that, the population size. And like I said, just because they wrote a good idea on paper doesn't mean they practiced it in their past 200 year ago society.
Uh-huh.
But the whole premise of America was decentralizing and removing how much power the central government can have, how much power the president himself or herself could have. Because if the president has all the power, then that's just a monarchy or a dictatorship, which is what America stood directly against, since they fought an entire Revolutionary War against the tyrant king of England. And I feel right now the modern political climate has moved away from that. I feel too many people look to the president as something of a big deal, which I think is wrong. No, like seriously, I've spoken to Canadians, right? And they treat our elections as reality TV shows.
You don't want to talk to Canadians right now. Canada's got their own issue.
They got their own issues right now.
BS that they've got to figure out.
My point is, the presidents nowadays have like a celebrity status, which I think is very wrong and very messed up. These people are supposed to be humble civil servants trying their best to help the people. They're not supposed to be like people you want to like high five and like kiss up to, And yet I feel like that's kind of the current environment we are, where people look at the president and say, wow, this person is truly amazing. They might be. Most of them aren't.
Yeah, so I didn't even get to answer your question, but you basically said, how is it that we can create a functioning mode of representation? Or what is the end state? What is the goal? Well, it depends on the side tangent quickly. It depends on the society, but when I say side tangent, did you ever have a professor in college that would just say it depends to whenever you ask them a question that you needed a concrete answer for?
Yep. A lot.
Yeah, those suck. But I'm saying that as a precursor to what I'm saying, which is it depends, because us as a human civilization, we require growth. Growth at all costs. You know, we do that thing. It's
I
literally in our
don't believe in
DNA to
that.
do that. Well, it doesn't matter if you don't believe in it, because it's literally how we've survived this whole time.
You're
And
right.
there's no other way to put it. And we won't be able to continue unless we maintain that quote unquote speed of growth. To be fair, the population is aging. Not in the US, it's really sort of stagnant, but in other countries, China, Japan, Russia, some parts of the Middle East as well, the demographics are horrible. People are literally aging, and it's very, very bad for those societies. They will literally not be able to produce enough economic output for the rest of the world. And if they're a huge exporter like China, they're not able to sustain the literal globalization of their entire manufacturing complex. So no, that's just one side of the thing though. My point is we prioritize growth, right? And when we talk about smaller groups of people being governed in a certain way, that may work, but it doesn't work on a scale of 10 billion people, which we probably will never reach, or we won't reach anytime soon. But when that happens, there has to be a different way, because we still are going to have international relations. We're still going to have borders. It's going to be all siphoned up. Everyone's going to hate each other and make up BS as to why he should not be the prime minister of said country, yada yada. There's no ways about that right now. Everyone is just going to believe what they want. But for their own economic gain, for their own financial incentive, they will still grow. And that's because we as human beings, I've made the sort of virus parasite comparison several times, but truth be told, that is literally how we survive. Otherwise, I think that's actually in a way how all life survives. It has this very virulent, parasitic characteristic to it, in that unless you can take these resources from said place and use them to create more of yourself and just exist completely and create more and more and more from the resources, while expending those resources but making sure that your survival is intact, you'll be fine.
Yeah, I
You seem
somewhat.
unsettled.
I no, because I said I don't like this growth at all costs mentality, and I think sort of figured out. Well, not figured out, but here's my thought on that. If it's growth, I am a strong believer of the diminishing law of returns.
Mm-hmm.
So the more you get, the less utility, the less happiness you get. So the more you expand, I think the less positive, like eventually, like if we have a population of 1 billion, great. If you have 2 billion, maybe not. It's like it's better if you can sustain it, but it's probably not so much better than the 1 billion.
Mm-hmm.
And like if you have a population of like 100 billion, it's like there comes a point where enough is enough, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in the realm of population and society, for those of you who don't know, the diminishing law of returns graph is basically like a logarithmic graph, which is basically like half of a frowny face, the left side of a frowny face. But I think if I think there reaches the point where you go too far, and then society just collapses, or you have extinction, or you just have revolution, or you just have something going wrong, whether you don't have enough resources to sustain the size you've grown to, whether the people can even get along with each other. If there's so many people, you're bound to have people with differing opinions. If you can offer enough security, or if you're a dictatorship, if can you like control these people, if it's so big, you know, every empire that's existed has fallen to some point. The
Mm-hmm.
Roman Empire fell, the Mongolian Empire fell, the ancient Greek Empire fell. You know, these were seen as apexes of civilization
Mm-hmm.
at some point, but they fell. And a lot of these civilizations that fell, not by conquest, but just by living, usually are because they grew really big.
Mm-hmm.
And you saying grow at any cost, but I feel like there has to be a stopping point. I think the hard part is like, when is the stopping point, because we're naturally greedy. But if you don't stop, if you don't stop to smell the roses, eventually all the roses, they're going to be gone, and you'll have nothing to smell but the ashes of your own society. You know what I'm saying?
That was pretty smooth. But no, I totally feel you. It makes sense. I just don't know that we'll be able to smell the roses right now.
To moderate ourselves.
Unless we make it to Mars, man.
That'll
You know what I'm saying? We just need to start
I
over
know.
on a planet that is literally 10 times more hostile than the most dry and lifeless desert on this planet.
You gotta start somewhere.
Yeah. And that in the process of starting on Mars, you know?
Why not? With that being said, whether you are smelling the roses of a long-forgotten burned-down civilization,
Or, if you're trying to 10x your portfolio copy trading Nancy Pelosi.
always remember to stay positive.